Joining us. From viral dance trends to comedy clips and everything in between, TikTok has become a massive social media platform. But as Northern News Now's Larissa Millis reports, several Wisconsin lawmakers are raising concerns over the app and in some cases want it banned.
Congressman Tiffany represents Northwest Wisconsin in Washington. He's one of several Republicans who sent a letter to Governor Tony Evers Tuesday urging him to stop the clock on TikTok.
Yeah, we're recommending that Governor Evers disallow TikTok to be used on state government devices.
Tiffany claims TikTok's parent company, Beijing headquartered ByteDance, could potentially be forced to give data to the Chinese government.
It's become more widely known over the last couple of years that TikTok is tied to the Communist Party in China and poses a national security threat.
Nebraska, Maryland, South Carolina, South Dakota, and Texas have all banned the app's use on government official devices so far.
That's the concern, is that it could compromise people's private data that the state government is holding.
The app, which hit 1 billion monthly users in September of 2021, uses an algorithm to personalize what kind of content users see on their feeds. While TikTok claims there have been no data requests from the Chinese government, University of Wisconsin Superior Security Analyst Josh Waring says concerns are valid.
Key operative word here is potentially. There is definitely a risk, and the risk comes from the fact that TikTok's parent company is a Chinese company, and there's concerns about how much control or influence the Chinese government could potentially have over TikTok through that parent company.
Waring says data privacy isn't a potential issue with just TikTok.
As with any social media platform, users should just be careful and cognizant with using it.
In Duluth, Larissa Millis, Northern News Now.
Governor Evers is yet to respond to the letter. He does not have any official TikTok account, but his re-election campaign did use the app leading up to November's election.